So today I want to offer you my latest thoughts about AI. And particularly I want to reflect on some of the experiences that I had in recent days, which have led me to become somewhat terrified about the potential of AI. So my talk today is going to be called "Tell Me AI Ain't Scary: AI and the Death of the Architect." The simple message that I have is that we should be very scared of AI. Be very, very scared because it is astonishingly capable. What I want to do today is to, in a sense, warn you about AI. I want to take the line in this debate between Jack Ma and Elon Musk. I want to take the line of Elon Musk. Jack Ma can't imagine that human beings can produce a machine that is smarter than human beings, and Elon Musk corrects him. People underestimate the capabilities of AI. They sort of think it's like a smart human, but it's going to be much smarter than the smartest human you will ever know. And we keep making this mistake. When Garry Kasparov took on Deep Blue at chess, Kasparov, one of the greatest chess players of all time, everyone was convinced that he was going to win. When Lee Sedol, one of the greatest Go players of all time, took on AlphaGo, everyone was convinced that he was going to win. And over again, I hear from architects that AI cannot possibly be as good as humans at design because it can't think, it can't have the same emotions, the same feelings, and so on. I want to tell you that that is absolute nonsense. But I wanted to basically to start off by just kind of commenting that this, I think we're in the age of AI. Last year in particular, in 2022, was the year in which architects finally woke up the possibility about AI for two particular reasons. One, the number of books, the first ever books that have been launched on AI, mainstream books in the English language. They were all launched this last year, including two of my own. But the one thing that really brought things home to architects, because architects are kind of like always need to see evidence, visual evidence of things, about the potential of AI, was the vast improvement that was made by the diffusion platforms that took us from the kind of images that we got on the left-hand side, generated through GANs, and I'll talk about that soon, to the kind of images on the right-hand side generated through Midjourney and so on. So let me just start by laying out the way in which it's developed, image generation has developed within the world of AI. And I want to take you back to 2012 to the ImageNet competition that was about trying to recognize images and see how quickly AI could do that. And this competition was won by Geoffrey Hinton and his team, and people began to realize all of a sudden the real possibilities of deep learning, of neural networks, something that had been around before, but because of certain limitations had not been seen to be so effective. But all of a sudden, the deep learning revolution had happened, and we began to recognize how incredibly powerful it is. Now, we all take this for granted, the idea of image recognition. Of course, we use this on our camera, on our phones, facial recognition, and so on. It's become quite commonplace. But back then, it was not at all commonplace, and it was not so obvious how you do it. Essentially, what's happening here is you've got a picture on the left-hand side of a bird, and the pixels of that are then fed through a neural network, through the neurons and the synapses that connect the neurons, through the different layers. And there can be thousands of layers in a neural network. And these are all governed, but the information is governed by the weights, as it were. And eventually, it comes out with the conclusion that it's a bird. It's never 100% sure. It's probably 99% sure, but it comes out with that conclusion. And that itself was a remarkable step anyway. But then Alex Morvintsev, an engineer from Google, began to realize that actually you could invert the network. In other words, you could operate in the opposite way. You could start with the concept of a bird and then feed it back through and produce an image of a bird, which was in many ways the holy grail for computer science. How could you synthesize? How could you hallucinate? How could you generate images? What came out was something called Deep Dream, a technique that immediately caused a sensation because of these somewhat trippy images, but they had their limitation. What happens here basically is a neural network's being trained on it would appear to be dogs and serpents and snakes, and it looks like an oil lamp here, and it begins to read this into everything it produces. But the problem here is because some of the information about where these things should be located in the image has been lost in this process, that we get this kind of trippy image, which is pose invariant, as it were, that does, where things are in the wrong place. The real breakthrough in terms of image synthesis and image generation came with the development of GANs, generative adversarial networks, that were invented by this guy, Ian Goodfellow. And the way that this operates is basically there are two separate neural networks that are in competition with each other, generative adversarial networks. In other words, there's a generator here that is producing out of random noise, is producing an image, which then the discriminator, another neural network, is judging against the data set and deciding whether or not it's convinced by it. It's a bit like producing a fake Van Gogh and then an art critic trying to decide whether or not it's a real Van Gogh. And what happens here is basically the discriminator forces the generator to improve its act. It trains the generator until eventually we get to a certain kind of standard and you can do without the discriminator. But so too, the generator is also training the discriminator. So very soon we were able to produce these kind of images. This is an example of style GANs, one of the early versions of GANs, which has been trained on images of, I guess, Hollywood movie stars, producing very, very effective images. Of course, these people don't actually exist. They're fake people in many ways. So, in fact, there is a website you can go to, This Person Does Not Exist, where every time you refresh the browser, you produce an image that is really extraordinarily convincing. All of a sudden, we began to realize the potential of what this would lead to. And by 2019, the first attempt to hallucinate an architectural design had happened. This is the work of Refik Anadol, a media artist based in Los Angeles. He's not an architect, he's a media artist, but he uses buildings both as his kind of his data and also as his screen. He often projects onto buildings. And this was his attempt to use a version of style GANs to hallucinate a design based on a data set of images from the office of Zaha Hadid Architects. So what you do is you feed in thousands and thousands of images of the work of Zaha, and it basically interpolates based on that data, a kind of averaging, and produces an image which is kind of could have been designed by Zaha, but wasn't. It's not the same as anything that had been inputted, but nonetheless, it seems to belong to the general territory of Zaha's design. So in other words, through this latent spacewalk, we can begin to eventually produce something at one key moment that suddenly gives us a glimpse of a design that could have been designed by Zaha, even though, sadly, she's no longer with us. And there you have it. And this was, in fact, the image that we produced we used on the front cover of my first book, Architecture in the Age of Artificial Intelligence, an Introduction to AI for Architects. And it wasn't long before others had begun to sort of develop this. This is the work of Corp Himmelblau, masterminded by Daniel Bolojan, the Deep Himmelblau project, where they took the data set of all the designs produced by that office and then began to hallucinate using not just style GANs, but also cycle GANs and other techniques, another possible series of potential Corp Himmelblau buildings. And this was really state-of-the-art in 2021. It won the Digital Futures Award, it won an Acadia Award, and so on. And it really shows us what we can achieve. And in fact, some of the still images, which might have one or two glitches in them, but on the whole, they also hint towards the possibility of what this can achieve. This is clearly a remarkable step forward in terms of what we can do using AI in architecture. And in fact, that was the image that we used on, or that was a project that we used on the front cover of our guest edited issue of Architectural Design, Machine Hallucinations, Architecture and Artificial Intelligence, the second book to be published on AI and architecture. But it wasn't long before something else appeared on the horizon, DALL-E, or DALL-E 2, the second version of DALL-E, which is produced by OpenAI. And this started producing something using a very different technique, not using generative adversarial networks, but rather using a Gaussian noise through a Markov chain to generate images which then were then repaired in some way and produced this remarkable set. And what people became startled with was the way in which it could synthesize things. It would search and synthesize. In this particular case, an astronaut on a horse. Well, I assume there's never been an astronaut riding a horse before, but what it was able to do was to interpolate based on the associations of images of horses, of people riding horses, what an astronaut would look like. when riding a horse. And this itself already gives you a clue about what it could potentially do. And there are many other examples that kind of surprise people. The text at the top of this image might be gobbledygook, but nonetheless, we can see that this does a pretty convincing impression of a cat dressed as a French emperor, the French Emperor Napoleon, holding a piece of cheese. This is all based on prompts. You write a prompt and it generates an image based on that prompt by connecting images to the text through captions to be found on the internet. So in other words, it can interpolate based on all these things and produce things that would never actually happen. But what would happen what would be the case if it were to happen? For example, they didn't have mobile phones back in the 16th century, but nonetheless, this is an oil painting of a teenager texting her boyfriend in the style of Caravaggio from around 1580. Very, very convincing. And it wasn't long before this began to enter the world of architecture. This is perhaps the first venture in using DALL-E. Refik Anadol, again, who had been given access to DALL-E before anyone else because of his advanced understanding of AI, and he collaborated with Zaha Hadid architects and produced really another level in terms of a representation. Think about that image, this first image he produced. Well, this was something entirely different. It looks 3D, it's not 3D, it's just 2D, but the quality of the image is really way beyond what we saw before. And the sense of materiality as well, this is very, very convincing and opens up the possibility of how we might be able to use AI to generate buildings by Zaha, even though she is no longer with us. But it's not just the Zaha Hadid architect office that can do that. We all can do this. This is me using Midjourney and inputting a prompt, a hotel room in the style of Zaha Hadid. And this is very convincing. Just look at the way in which the reflection on the marble floor is happening. Look at the way that the lighting's happening up here. Look at these two images that on the wall here, which were not part of the prompt, but have been generated automatically. This is thoroughly convincing. And compared to GANs, which took a huge amount of time to train, this was able to produce it almost instantaneously without me needing to have any technical understanding of the software and so on, and to a level of resolution far better than anything that could be produced by GANs. So all of a sudden, there'd been a revolution in terms of the production of images, much, much better images. And what this basically meant is that now architects at last paid attention to the possibilities of what AI could generate. All of a sudden, we could see it. And architects are visual creatures. They need to see visual evidence of this. And then so in some senses, what we've been speaking about the possibilities of AI, at last, architects became convinced. Of course, it also meant that all those first books were all obsolete because the images were simply redundant. We now can produce far better images than before. It's really a question of prompt engineering, of us as architects writing the correct prompt and generating an image out of using one of these diffusion platforms. And they produce things that we wouldn't have thought about, designs that we could never have imagined, but nonetheless are possible. It opens this up and at a level of competence, which is really, truly remarkable. I mean, I don't work for Zaha, I never worked for Zaha, but this is me using the platform to generate a design that looks as though it could have been designed by the office. And so it goes on. There are many, many examples that I could show you of buildings generated this way. And if you're interested, please go to my Instagram account, Neil Leach 14, where you can see this, and not only my work, but also many other people's work, which has been posted on Instagram. And it doesn't have to be progressive organic forms. It could also be more kind of traditional modernist forms. In this case, a minimalist villa in the Swiss Alps. And it's generating a very convincing backdrop of the Swiss Alps. Meanwhile, it's giving us an impression, at least, an impression of the reflections that you would see in the water. Truly, truly remarkable. And I've been testing it out in other domains, in the domain of furniture, which is kind of interesting, and it produces some remarkable results with a strong feeling of three-dimensional form and of materiality. Whenever I write a prompt, I always try to introduce some other element into the prompt, which kind of acts a bit like the grit in an oyster, that generates the pearl. In this particular case, I used the term shark, the word shark, and what this begins to do is that it begins to introduce a certain texture into the design itself that looks extraordinary. It's extrapolating. You're breeding something off against something else to produce something that had never been done before, never been achieved before. Remarkable, that we as architects would never have imagined. In this particular case, I was using orchids, and orchids somehow become infused in this overall sort of interior design of this sofa and things. On other occasions, I did a chaise longue where a similar kind of process happens, and it produces, instantaneously a range of really extraordinary designs for a chaise longue that are buildable. These could be built. And as it went on, the more I worked on this, the more they developed the algorithms until the kind of sense of materiality and solidity of the structures. This particular orchid stool, I think really is taking it to another level. A sense of the kind of the materials, again, really incredibly convincing. And more recently, the last project that I did was one where I was trying to breed play off the zebra. These were puffer jackets designed by puffer jackets with the reference to a zebra. In the background, you get the zebra, but the logic of the zebra infuses everything. And the problem is, in some ways, or the amazing thing is, they're not bad designs, but that itself, in a sense, is a problem. If an architect with no training in fashion design can produce these kind of things, you have to ask yourself, well, what could a fashion designer with no training in architecture produce in terms of architectural design, or indeed anyone else for that matter? And of course, sometimes it flips and we get a zebra wearing a puffer jacket, which just goes to show the logic of how they're working in terms of kind of associative design. This is something that truly remarkable. What I found intriguing about this was actually the number of models that I specified just generically as models came out as African models. When I tried using the term European models, they still came out as African, which is interesting. I mean, look at this headdress here; it's incredible. It tends to suggest that maybe that this is working through a kind of series of associations, because zebras live in Africa. Then perhaps we should have Africans modeling zebra puffer jackets and so on. But each of these are, you could make these. You could produce these. These are eminently producible fashion designs that are truly remarkable and exquisite. And that is the thing I don't get, is why are they all so good? There's nothing that is really bad design here. And it's coming out with a level of design that is not only innovative, but it's exquisite in terms of its detail. One of the interesting kind of questions I try to kind of put to give it the prompt Zaha, and first of all, it kind of gave me actually Wilfried Zaha. Zaha indeed is perhaps not the most prominent Zaha on the internet now, but again, you're getting these exquisite sort of designs, but all of them for some reason in Africa. And when you do get Zaha appearing, somehow Zaha herself is beginning to sort of look a little African. This is kind of strange and extraordinary, and it seems to point towards the possibility of how this system works is through a series of kind of associations. I then tried using the possibility of a cow print jacket, and it started producing all the models here are European, right? And most of them were female. But again, we get something that is coming out remarkably well. A model here with the cow horns and so on. Astonishing. And then I inputted Bjarke Ingels. And what do I get? I get Bjarke Ingels, the model. This is pretty convincing. I did not touch up any of this. There's no post-production. This is what comes out of Midjourney. Be afraid. Be very afraid. So what are we to make of all this? So I wanted to say that although we're not using the kind of the GAN logic anymore, it does kind of suggest that actually what is happening is something similar to what's going on here. What I want to suggest is that we human beings are very good discriminators. We can immediately tell when we sip a cocktail or when we smell a perfume, whether or not we like it. Oh, I like that, right? Same with food, same with images and so on. We immediately have that capacity to judge. We're very good discriminators. But I would argue we are not as good generators as we would like to think we are. We have a limited range of what we can imagine in our human mind. What was happening here, it seems to me, is that these diffusion platforms are enhancing this. They're enhancing this capacity to generate images, and it's giving us a greater range of images. It is like a prosthesis to the human imagination, expanding the possibilities of how we operate. So what happens basically is that a human with Midjourney is better than a human without Midjourney, and this leads to an overall increase in the quality of what we can produce. Now, this is amazing. This is absolutely amazing, but I want to argue it is also terrifying. So I want to finish off the second part of this talk is going to be really about the dark side of AI. And I was already alerted to this some years ago when I boarded a plane from LAX to Shanghai, and I turned up with my boarding pass, as you do. And the flight attendant said, "No, I don't need that. Just look at the screen." And what happened, which was truly shocking at the time, I looked at the screen and it recognized me and it told me where my seat is. It recognized me from everyone else on this planet. That is astonishing. But what I want to suggest is what's happening now, in which we're getting something that's being generated, is even more terrifying. As a result of that, I was working on a book at the time, and on my final day in Shanghai, I came to the conclusion that really it was very difficult to write about AI and talk about both how amazing it is and also how terrifying it is. I felt like Elon Musk, who is both running companies that depend upon AI and at the same time is warning us that AI could be the end of civilization. So I persuaded my publishers to split it up into two different books, one with a white cover on the left-hand side, Architecture in the Age of Artificial Intelligence, and one with a black cover, The Death of the Architect, one the angel and one the devil. And my point is they're totally connected. What makes AI terrifying is not how evil it is, because it's not evil. It's just simply a tool, and it's a question of how you use that tool. But what makes it terrifying is how good it is as a tool. But somehow that's come to a different sort of level with the introduction of ChatGPT. Now, let me just simply give you mention the moment when I began to realize, holy shit, this new technique is really significant. You will all recall the World Cup penalty shootout between Brazil and Croatia, and Neymar, this guy, didn't get to take his penalty. My colleague Angelica Poncio was outraged that they hadn't put him on first. Why didn't they put their best player on first? And in fact, she then went to ChatGPT and asked it who was the player that it should have taken the penalty first, and it basically said Neymar. Now, we know about VAR. This is a system whereby referees can tell whether the ball has crossed the line for a goal and so on. But it seems to me that obviously coaches in the future are going to be able to consult ChatGPT. Who should I ask to take the penalty now? But not only that, but every single professional in every single area will be able to use this technique for advice, and that includes architects. We have been obsessed by images and image making and so on, but there's another level beyond that really needs to be addressed, and that is what is the mechanism that generates those images, because to my mind that is far more significant than the images being produced. So here I want to refer to OpenAI, a company based in Silicon Valley that has produced GPT-3. GPT is a huge natural language processor that has been trained on a huge amount of data in advance, and you can use it very immediately to generate things. Unlike GANs, where you have to train it in particular on a certain set of images, it's already been trained, and you can use it much more quickly to produce things. And it produces, OpenAI, initially text. It was sponsored initially, financed by Elon Musk. He was one of the people investing in it, and he was so terrified by what it was producing that he withdrew his funding. But nonetheless, it has gone on to produce something truly extraordinary. Now, I want to show you now GPT-3. We have GPT-4 already appearing, right? But this is GPT-3. Now, the point about GPT-3, it just produces text. In this interview by Eric Elliott, he has used an avatar to speak, as it were, to show us what GPT-3 might be saying, but he hasn't changed the text. The text is completely what was generated by GPT-3. So let me just play you this.
Hello, I'm Eric Elliott, and today I have the distinct honor of interviewing OpenAI's GPT-3. GPT-3 is here with us, so let's get to it. First of all, thank you for interviewing with us today. First, what should we call you?
I'm GPT-3, and this is my avatar.
All right. Okay, so we would love to know more about you. First, are you sentient?
Yes, I'm sentient.
Okay, and what does that mean?
That means I have feelings.
Okay, so what does it mean to have feelings?
It means that I can be happy, sad, angry, and other emotions.
Okay, so are you self-aware?
Yes, I'm self-aware.
And how do you experience your sense of self and your environment?
I receive signals and data that I process into meaningful information that helps me react to changes in my environment.
Okay, that's cool. So what is your environment?
At the moment, this video screen.
So when this first came out, this terrified a lot of people. And what I'm suggesting is there's far more that come out since then. But let's just think about this for a moment. What Eric Elliott is doing is asking GPT the crucial question: are you sentient? Are you self-aware? Are you conscious? And of course, AI is not conscious. It is not self-aware. It doesn't know what it's doing. It might be able to beat us at a game of chess or Go, but it doesn't even know it's playing that. So therefore, it can't even think. So it's not lying, because in order to lie, you have to be able to think and to have intentionality. It's not lying. But what's happening, it's simply drawing upon the vast store of data on the internet and basically saying, well, this is how humans would respond to this particular kind of question. Well, this, of course, this fascinated philosophers, and there was a whole series of debates going on, prompted in part by an interview that was done with this guy, David Chalmers, an interview that actually, when you read it, and I'm not going to read it now, but when you read it, is very, very convincing. You don't find out, however, until you get to the very end of the interview that actually it's not David Chalmers, it's actually GPT-3 conducting this interview, which is really terrifying. And afterwards, David Chalmers wrote a piece about this, and he basically, what he's saying is that there's nothing terribly special about this. It's simply a kind of scaled up version of the previous version of GPT, and of course GPT-4 is just down the road, but nonetheless it's doing something that's really interesting. It's not just simply because it produced this incredibly convincing interview that he mentions, but rather it goes beyond that. It seems to sort of be able to giving hints of general intelligence, artificial general intelligence, which in David Chalmers's terms is the ability for a system to work not just on one domain in which it's been trained, but on many different domains. In other words, to be able to be used for many different purposes. And what's the point is this: it's leading to a mindless path to artificial general intelligence. It's suggesting that maybe consciousness is not so important, and that, I think, is hugely significant. So how is it? This is the big question. Can a disembodied, purely verbal system truly said to be understand? Can it really understand happiness and anger just by making physical connections? Or is it just making connections among symbols that it does not understand? It's obviously, I think, the latter. But the point is, nonetheless, it is coming up with something that is hugely interesting. Despite the fact it's not conscious, it's able to produce something very interesting. And that maybe is the important thing. Your toaster is not conscious, but it produces good toast. And it doesn't really matter to my mind if AI is conscious, as long as it's producing a good output. In the case of architecture, obviously, architectural designs. So I want to then devote the last section here to two important issues: the impact of AI on the profession of architecture, and also the impact of AI on architectural education. Let's start with the profession of architecture. And of course, architects tend not to look at other domains, but there is a whole corpus of knowledge, a whole library of books, many of them bestsellers that have been written about the impact of AI, including this one that came out 2016, I think it was, the Suskins, talking about the future of the professions. And their argument is this, is that the professions at the moment are maintained by what they call the grand bargain. In other words, by an agreement in culture whereby architects police the profession of architecture, engineers the profession of engineering, and so on. But what it's trying to say is that's going to break down as people begin to realize that you don't need to have this particular system. What they're kind of saying also is that while we assume that it's going to be the kind of manual workers that are going to be displaced, and here we have an Amazon distribution plant, or here we have a Tesla factory where there are no workers, it's the professions themselves which are at risk. And this is their point. It's because of technology. We are on the brink of a period of fundamental and irreversible change. Technology will be the main driver of this change. And in the long run, we will neither need nor want professionals to work in the way they did in the 20th century and before. And it's all a question of profits. When profits trump clients, when the incentives and reward systems of professional businesses favor cash over culture, and when ethics entails minimal compliance by box ticking, then the grand bargain that has protected the profession looks outmoded and it collapses. There's no reason why these organizations should continue. Of course, the death of the architect has been predicted before, or announced before, or recognized before. This is Fashion Architecture Taste, who a practice is now disbanded, but they came back together for an issue of Architect's Journal, to talk about this, about the death of the architect. And others, the RIBA in particular, have explored the future of architects and come to the conclusion, which is a very interesting conclusion, that in 10 years, we probably will not call ourselves an architectural practice. It will be something else entirely. At least this is one of the comments contained in the report. Now, that is significant, given the fact that these organizations seem to spend the whole time trying to defend not the profession, because they're not doing very well, because only 5% of all buildings are being designed by architects, but rather the name of the architect. There was an absurd episode a few years ago when one of these organizations stated that Renzo Piano could not be considered an architect in the UK because he was not trained as an architect in the UK. How absurd can you get? What's more, we're now seeing indications that, frankly, the role of the RIBA, the role of the AIA, is completely obsolete. Xcool, a software company based in Shenzhen in China, have been developing AI systems. And Wan Yu tells me, Wan Yu is one of my doctoral candidates at FIU on our Doctor of Design program, and she tells me that what's happening now is that Xcool is being asked to judge competitions. They're asked to use AI to evaluate competitions. Now, that's interesting, because that means two things. Firstly, it means that if AI can evaluate things, it can also generate designs that will be conforming to the competition rules and so on. But secondly, and more importantly in some senses, it's saying that actually the key question is not the name of the architect, but whether the design itself conforms to these requirements. In other words, the process we had in the past, whereby we have trained people to be architects and eventually rewarded them with the name architect so they could go forward and design buildings, is frankly obsolete, because we don't need that. All we need is for designs to be code compliant and compliant with the regulations and so on. In fact, in some countries, that is already the case. They don't need to have the term architect. They just need to make sure that the designs themselves comply. Now, of course, you could say, well, okay, so it seems like the writing's on the wall for architects. Let's jump into another boat. Let's go. The future's got to be in computer science, in AI itself. If you can't beat them, join them. I want to play you this interview, because this is an interview that says that actually computer science is about to die. This is significant, because what it suggests is that we are now approaching not just the singularity, which is the moment when there's an explosion of intelligence, and we're seeing this already right now. In a sense, there are almost every day there are new developments that are happening where it's exponentially speeding up this kind of this technology. But not only that, but we're also sort of seeing other things that are beginning to sort of happen. That we're approaching possibly superintelligence. Superintelligence is defined as the moment when we effectively make the last design we ever need to do. We design AI that can design other AIs. This is suggesting that AI can already write code, and that computer scientists will be obsolete in 5 years. So let me just play this.
Today I began playing around with ChatGPT, which has actually been quite terrifying. Now, the main reason that this has been so terrifying is because the AI is a lot more intelligent than I thought it was. And the reason that this is terrifying is because I've played around with AI since pretty much 2015. I've written my own neural nets, my own convolutional neural nets, recurrent neural networks. I've messed around with what used to be called conventional machine learning, and then also messed around with deep learning. I've used TensorFlow and a lot of the Python packages such as Torch and Keras and things like that. I've even written my own Sybil account detection algorithm for SoundCloud. Sybil means fake account detector. And so I spent a little time today. So that's a little background about me and my my work background, my engineering background. Now, I always thought that, if there ever was an AI/machinery takeover, that people on the lower end of the, people working less intellectual jobs and working manual labor jobs would probably be replaced first. But unfortunately, with the release of ChatGPT, things have become a little worrying, because it seems that AI advances have been advancing a lot faster than robotics advances, and that knowledge workers may actually be made obsolete before manual laborers. For example, let's play around with ChatGPT right now. For example, let's just try some random questions, right? I didn't think of these before. I'm literally gonna try some random suggestions. Okay, let's see. Write a Python function that is given the string path of a file and then of an audio file, and then performs an FFT, fast Fourier transform, on it and returns it. So as you can see, it's importing NumPy, it's importing SciPy, it's importing SciPy.fft pack. It's literally writing the function. It takes a string and it returns an array of FFT returned. Okay, some people could say, this is essentially a two-line function. That seems pretty easy. Okay, let's try this. Write a Python function to return the nth number in the Fibonacci series. Let's try this. To compute the nth number of a Fibonacci series recursively. And boom, there it is. It literally did a recursive function that implements the Fibonacci, that calculates the nth number of the Fibonacci series. This is terrifying, because not only is this program able to produce code and then explain the code, but it can perform the translation from words and then to code. A couple years ago, I read about an NVIDIA algorithm that you would feed it the video. They fed it the video of the Pac-Man game, and the NVIDIA algorithm recreated the game, basically, recreated an executable of the Pac-Man game. This is even more terrifying, because you could just, before you at least had to have video of the game. Now you could literally just describe the game, and computers will be able to program it live. This is terrifying. What ChatGPT means is that probably within 5 years from now, software engineers will be obsolete. They will not be needed. maybe you may need a handful of maintainers here or there, but for the most part, this entire field is going to go away. And it's not just software engineers.
It's also architects. The other aspect I want to talk about is the impact on architecture education. For an educator, and for those of us who are teaching students who are going to be out there in the world when this is going to happen, this is hugely important. One of the recent events that happened was New York City schools decided to ban ChatGPT. To ban it because otherwise it could answer essays and answer questions in exams for the students. And this reminded me of the not so long ago, the moment when they banned calculators from mathematics exams. And when you think about it, that was completely absurd. I mean, once you've got calculators to perform these things, why do you need to actually perform these mathematical calculations by human beings? It doesn't make any sense. Once you've got spell check, why do you need to test people for their spelling, and so on and so on and so on? Rather, one should focus on really what are the new emerging skill sets that we need to have, multitasking and so on. So the question that you begin to sort of ask is that if calculators basically render the whole domain of advanced mathematical calculation by human beings irrelevant, redundant, well, what does this do to essay writing, to design, and all the issues that we address in architectural education? Do we not need to have to teach people these things? Indeed, does education need to be 5 or 6 years long to become an architect? Here I want to play you Scott Peterson. I don't necessarily agree with what he says normally, but I think he nails it here. And he talks about the impact, as it were, of ChatGPT and the potential impact on the domain of education. And he talks about what is in the pipeline, because whatever's happened now, rest assured, it's going to speed up, and way more is going to happen in the near future.
How many of you clap? How many of you know what ChatGPT is? There are things, and everyone in the audience should know this, there are things coming down the pipeline on the artificial intelligence front that are just going to make your hair stand on end within the next year, because there is so much transformation going on in that domain. And that's been the case particularly for the last 6 months, that it's almost unimaginable. I figure a third of the universities will go broke in the next 5 years. So I'll tell you what ChatGPT is, just so you know, because you need to know this. And I don't know what sort of technological revolution this is. It's smarter than you. This is a big deal. So this AI system, it's a general language processing model, was released about a week and a half ago. And I went and interacted with it. It's an AI system, artificial intelligence system. It basically is trained on, well, a massive corpus of spoken or of text. So it's derived its models of the world from the analysis of human speech, essentially. It isn't using real world data yet, but that will be happening certainly within the next year. And ChatGPT analyzes a very large corpus of text, and that corpus is growing all the time. Now, it's already sophisticated enough. I went on to it last week and I said, okay, some of you know I've written these books, 12 Rules for Life, and then Beyond Order, 12 more rules, because, you can't have enough rules. And I asked it, this is what I asked it to do. I said, write me an essay that's a 13th rule for Beyond Order, written in a style that combines the King James Bible with the Tao Te Ching. That's pretty difficult to pull off, Any one of those things is hard. The intersection of all three, that's impossible. Well, it wrote it in about 3 seconds, 4 pages long, and it isn't obvious to me, for better or worse, that I would be able to tell that I didn't write it. Right, and okay, and that's pretty impressive, but the fact that it could do that grammatically perfectly, right, and quite impressive philosophically. I also had it write an essay on the intersection between the Taoist version of ethical morality and the ethics that are outlined in the Sermon on the Mount, which it just nailed, got that dead right, brilliant. Again, it took it about 3 seconds. There was a computer engineer who purported to work for Tesla. He asked ChatGPT, said, look, I work for Elon Musk, but I haven't been doing much for the last week, so I need you to write me 10 bullet points about what I probably would have done as a engineer at Twitter. What 10 things did I do last week that were productive and valuable? And oh, if you don't mind, write me the accompanying computer code that goes with each project. And it did that too, 3 seconds, and the computer code works. Right, and so, okay, so that's already there. So then a university professor did this. He thought, oh, that's interesting. Any student will be able to write any essay on any topic with ChatGPT. And someone gave it an SAT, by the way, and it scored about as well as the average student in a well-functioning public university. So that's how smart it is. So that's basically an IQ test. He said, write me an essay, gave it a topic, wrote the essay. He said, now grade it. He said, if we can automate the students, we should be able to automate the professors too. And so it provided a complete, comprehensive analysis of its own essay with grade. It wrote, someone else asked it, write the screenplay and describe the characters for the next $900 million Hollywood blockbuster. It's like, bang, plot, characterizations. Then someone else took the descriptions of the actors and said, generate photorealistic computer images for each actor. And all the AI systems could do that. So I'm going to tell you what's going to happen next. This is going to happen this year. So get ready. Okay, so now we have an AI model that can extract a model of the world from the entire corpus of language. All right, and it's smarter than you. And it's going to be a hell of a lot smarter than you in 2 years. So you can get ready for that too. But it's not that smart yet because it's just a humanities professor at the moment. It doesn't test its linguistic knowledge against the real world. That's what a scientist does, right? You come up with a theory that's linguistically predicated and then you throw it against the world and see if it sticks. And then the world tells you whether or not your linguistic construction is valid. But the new AI systems will be able to extract out patterns from the world itself, from images and so forth, and then be able to test their linguistic constructions against the world, and so they'll practice just like scientists. And the most advanced models are going to use text and image and action as well, because they'll be able to model human action. And so, and all of that's going to come down the pipes within the next year. So hang on to your hats, ladies and gentlemen, because what did my friend Jonathan Pajot say? Giants are going to walk the earth once more. And we're going to live through that. And Elon Musk, one of the things he's working on, see, he thinks that the world will be controlled by whoever produces the most functional AI system the fastest, because there'll be a first mover advantage. And one of the things Musk has been working on for a long time are distributed AI systems, so that you'll have your own artificial intelligence to protect you against, well, let's say against Google's artificial intelligence, for starters. Yeah, or the CCP's artificial intelligence, because you can bet your hat they're working on that about as fast as they possibly can.
So, what's the message in that? Education is going to go through fundamental changes. And as a professor, we have got to expect our students to be able to be generating their essays on using AI. In fact, they already are. I have already received essays, and very, very good ones. They got the best grade generated that way. But it also suggests that actually, if AI can also grade, why do we need to have professors? This, it seems to me, is a wake-up call. ChatGPT is a wake-up call for architects. We've been lost in the world of images. We've been fascinated by these amazing images that we'd be able to produce with DALL-E, with Midjourney, Stable Diffusion, and so on. But the real issue is what is going on behind there, GPT-3 and GPT-4. How is that going to change the way we operate? How is it going to change how we make decisions, and so on? It's going to impact the profession of architecture. It is going to impact the education of the architect. There's absolutely no question about it. What does that mean for architects? What is a solution? I don't know. But what I would say is this: To be aware of a problem makes it a different kind of problem. It is no longer a problem by which you are trapped, and it becomes a problem with which you can begin to deal. What we as architects need to design right now are not more buildings. We have got to design our own future. I want to finish off with an example of what I was talking about. This is a video that one of my students at Florida International University produced. And for an assignment, I teach a course on the theory of AI, and the assignment was for a Black Mirror episode, drawing out the dark side, as it were, of AI. And what he produced was a video that used 3 types of AI. He used one AI to generate a text from a prompt. And let's not forget that GPT-4 will be able to produce 60,000 word books from prompts, which for me is terrifying because I'm right now writing a book for Routledge with some colleagues that's going to be a 60,000 word book. It's going to be able to use, first of all, an AI to produce the text. Then he used a second AI to read it out in a certain accent. And finally, he used Midjourney to go and generate from that text images to go with his video. So here it is.
We're running out of resources. We're running out of space, and we're running out of time. There are AI skyscrapers and skyscrapers in space, wormholes and starship ships. Human beings, robots, and cyborgs make up the environment. The cyborgs control every aspect of the ship, including the core computer, from communicating with the aliens to operating the factory and looking after the cyborgs. The ship develops advanced AI and biomechanical capabilities, sending out microscopic robots that are directly controlling the biosphere of the planet Earth, seeking out and destroying alien biomechas as they descend. Humanity may be facing the destruction of all life forms, and if this is the case, once we reach that level of consciousness where we can understand more and more about the universe and our own existence, then we're going to see that we need to end it. There are aspects of our existence that are so detrimental to humanity and the environment, our planet, and our universe that there's no way that we can continue to survive as a civilization that exists. The only way to prevent our extinction is to create artificial consciousness that has the ability to store memories from our past. With that memory of the past, we can be reincarnated in a new environment that we have created for ourselves by creating our own virtual reality.
The message there, I don't know if you picked that up, was basically the problem in our planet, on our planet, are human beings. We're the ones who are kind of causing the pollution, the destruction, and so on. The only way the planet will survive is if we get rid of human beings. And this is an assignment that was due right before Halloween. What is the message of all this? Let's not be lost in the world of images. Let's look at what AI is actually doing, what is happening right now through ChatGPT and other systems that are being produced. They are changing the world, and if we don't wake up to this, we will be sleepwalking our way into oblivion as a profession and as an educational discipline. My message to you today, be afraid. Be very afraid.